Hey guys, it's towniesimbuilds here, and welcome back to another episode of The Sims 4 Real Lore. In this series, we dive into fascinating destinations from around the world, shrouded in history, mystery, and sometimes a little bit of spookiness. In today's episode, we dive into one of Spain's most unsettling mysteries, the Zaragoza Goblin, a case that has perplexed the world for nearly a century. For one Spanish family, their home received extensive examination from local authorities and spectators alike, as an unseen entity plagued their apartment like no other before it. Was it a spirit? A poltergeist? An elusive duende? Or was it all an elaborate hoax? Before diving into today's video, I do want to note that this episode will cover topics regarding the supernatural and paranormal, so please keep that in mind while watching. On another note, I am not fully versed in Spanish, but I will do my best to pronounce these different names for you guys. Starting off our tale today, the story of the Zaragoza Goblin takes place in the city of Zaragoza, Spain, located in the province of Aragon, northeast of Spain's capital, Madrid. Within the city of Zaragoza existed a street by the name of Gascon de Couture, where a large apartment complex once stood. At the core of today's story, a family known as the Palazons lived within apartment 2 of the complex, most notably with a young housemate by the name of Pascuala Alcocer. Unfortunately, little information has been recorded about the family. Names, ages, and occupations have been lost to time. However, a particular incident in the fall of 1934 would become ingrained in their family's name for decades to come. Reportedly, in September of 1934, the Palazons experienced a terrifying voice that emanated from somewhere within their home. The family was shocked to hear a series of laughs and screams coming from their second-floor apartment. But upon entering the space and examining the rooms, there was no one in sight. Honing into the horrifying sounds, however, the family was able to locate the source of this disturbance, a voice that appeared to be within the kitchen walls, with the family's stove being the most likely source. The chimney, connected directly above the stove itself, seemed to be another possible source for the voice. Unfortunately, the family wasn't able to locate any suspect within the home. However, as the family endured the strange and upsetting voice in the next few months, more neighbors would also take notice. Apparently, the voice could be heard throughout the complex. The Palazons, who became confused and stressed by the occurrence, reportedly allowed neighbors to enter their home. Likewise, their neighbors confirmed hearing the frightening voice themselves within the Palazons' apartment, but their efforts to locate the source were also in vain. According to some reports, at some point the voice became even more devious. On multiple occasions, it is said that the voice was actually known to address the members of the Palazon family by name. Although the agreed upon dates of this occurrence are not consistent, most sources state that by late November of 1934, authorities were called in to investigate. This was initiated with the assistance of Judge Don Pablo de Pablos and Zaragoza Mayor Otero Mireles, who sought to resolve the case once and for all. Arturo Grijalba, who lived in the same apartment complex in Zaragoza, provided his eerie account of the bizarre event. Interviewed by the Spanish television show 𝗧𝗏𝗚𝗡 Milenio, Arturo was said to be the last surviving eyewitness involved in the case, being the son of the building's owner at that time. The following lines are Arturo's exact words regarding his experience. This went on till about 5 in the morning. Early in the afternoon, we, the residents, called the police. After we called the police, this is when the voice started shouting, "Cowards! Cowards! Cowards! You called the police! Cowards!" Despite authorities, neighbors, and nearby residents now being present on the scene, a possible suspect was not able to be located. Likewise, no one accepted responsibility for the strange voice. The main person of interest, however, was the family maid Pascuala Alcocer, who reportedly was the first person to witness the voice within the apartment complex. Based on her accounts of the previous evening, Pascuala had been in the family's kitchen when she encountered an eerie sound. From her accounts, the sound resembled an odd moaning that seemed to be coming from within the stove. Reportedly, she attempted to reach over the stove, as if to turn it on or open a possible compartment. However, the voice quickly responded with, "You are hurting me." Understandably, Pascuala was frightened by the experience, turning off the kitchen light and fleeing from the room. Tauntingly, the voice replied with, "Light, because I can't see." Now, as a quick note, there are aspects of the Zaragoza incident that remain unclear. In fact, some sources claim that Pascuala had been experiencing eerie occurrences for some time, prior to the knowledge of the Palazon family. These same sources claim that Pascuala felt like she had been watched by someone or something she was unable to see, and supposedly had heard the voice for at least a month prior to the incident coming to light. If this is true, it is likely that Pascuala withheld these experiences from her employer, in fear that they would not believe her. However, after hearing the voices themselves, the Palazons were quickly met with the unsettling truth. Over the course of days, it is said that several professionals entered the apartment in efforts to locate the voice. Builders, masons, and a local architect were all called to the scene, checking for possible sources within the air ducts, electrical ducts, and even below the floorboards. All rooms within the apartment, including the attic and cellar, were all examined but with no results. Reportedly, one builder attempted to investigate the chimney opening. The chimney opening was crucial to the case, given that it was connected to the family stove where the voice was originally heard. Additionally, it also ran through other apartments in the building, enabling neighbors in other units to hear the voice as it echoed throughout the walls of the complex. As the builder was about to measure the chimney opening, however, multiple sources say the voice spoke once more. Reportedly, the voice stated, "You need not trouble. The diameter is just 6 inches." Upon hearing this, some sources say that the builder was so disturbed that he left his tools at the Palazons' apartment, rushing away from the scene. Unable to find a true culprit for the case, one unfortunate individual remained at the center of this strange mystery: Pascuala Alcocer, the family maid. The fact that she was the first to encounter the voice led some to question the validity of her accounts, accusing the maid of pulling off an elaborate hoax to potentially frighten the Palazon family. Furthermore, knowing the names of the family members and asking specific personal questions seemed even more suspicious. Unfortunately for Pascuala, one individual who was very devoted to convicting her was a psychologist by the name of 𝗧𝗛𝗡𝗏. Entering the case, it is said that Joaquin interviewed Pascuala extensively before arriving at a very bizarre conclusion. His diagnosis concluded that Pascuala was suffering from hysteria, and as a result, was performing what some would call unconscious ventriloquism. Some argue, however, that this was a false diagnosis, aimed at closing the case rather than truthfully examining Pascuala. José Miguel Guiona, a Spanish psychologist who also appeared in the show 𝗧𝗛𝗏𝗧𝗛𝗡, further supported 𝗪𝗧𝗪's assessment, stating that in a heightened state of hysteria, words could be spoken even without one's own awareness. Despite this bold claim, many factors did not align to support this theory. On one note, there were no reports of Pascuala holding any ill will to the Palazon family or the neighboring residents of the apartment, nor did she have any concrete means of creating the voice and reverberating it throughout the building. In contrast to 𝗪𝗧𝗪's assessment, 2 additional doctors, Dr. 𝗪𝗧𝗪𝗏 and 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗏, also examined Pascuala. Fortunately, they found that Pascuala was not suffering from hysteria or any mental ailments, nor was there any evidence that she had consciously or subconsciously fabricated the voice. Unfortunately, due to the constant harassment surrounding the accusation, Pascuala eventually left the city of Zaragoza while the investigation was still occurring. Much to the shock of the authorities and experts, however, the mysterious voice continued to echo throughout the apartments. In doing so, this negated the possibility of Pascuala being the culprit. Unfortunately, regardless of being absolved from the incident, Pascuala Alcocer reportedly did not return to her position with the Palazons. Furthermore, it is said that Pascuala did not live comfortably in the many years after the investigation, with her name being tarnished by her association with the case. Investigator Ángel Brianjos further details the suffering Pascuala endured in relation to the accusations. During his interview with 𝗧𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗛𝗡, Ángel claimed to have spoken with Pascuala, who stated that she lived a life of seclusion for many decades. Unfortunately, the constant interrogation regarding her involvement with the voice prevented her from leaving her home, unable to shop in public. The unfair consequences of the case negatively impacted her life until her eventual passing. Following Pascuala's leave from Zaragoza, Arturo Grijalba recalled that policemen became stationed at various points within and outside of the apartment complex. However, with Pascuala Alcocer no longer in the scope of the investigation, the mysterious voice became eerily fixated on the young Arturo. Just a boy at the time of the incident, Arturo bravely communicated with the voice in the presence of local authorities. His exact account is provided once more from his interview with 𝗧𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗛𝗏𝗧. "So I said, 'Let's go, Dad. Let's go to sleep. This thing is crazy.' Then, within a few seconds, the voice responds to me with, not crazy little one, with a guttural voice. It left everyone scared, except for me since it talked to me. That's the last phrase I heard from it. Arturo recounted prior instances in which the voice communicated peacefully with him. However, the details of those conversations have been lost over time. Despite some of the efforts to converse with the voice, the investigation would take a drastic turn in an effort to find the culprit. Reportedly, with a combination of local authorities and armed soldiers, the entire apartment block in Zaragoza was evacuated. To cut off potential sources of the voice, both radio and television connections were disabled throughout the complex. In turn, this would allow for a more thorough investigation of the property, as plumbers and electricians also sought ways that the voice could have been transmitted into the building. However, not long after the evacuation, the mysterious voice returned. To the shock of many involved, the voice became even more aggressive. Based on reports, the voice proceeded to swear, insulting the experts involved in the investigation, and going as far as threatening the occupants of the apartment complex itself. As malicious as these statements were, however, the voice suddenly ceased. There were no more threats, no more screams, laughter, or conversations emanating from the walls. However, there was still a lack of an official culprit, nor did anyone admit to being the source of the voice itself. This sudden halt in activity, while unexplained, led the local government to officially end the investigation and eventually dismiss all authorities involved by mid-December of 1934. Over the years, the question of who was behind the voice in the Zaragoza apartments has become a topic of many interesting yet chilling theories. Unfortunately, Pascuala Alcocer remains to be the only possible human suspect in relation to the case. However, based on the evidence, or lack thereof, Pascuala was not behind the voice. The possibility of a human intruder within the apartment complex is still a viable theory. However, with a combined force of policemen, armed soldiers, engineers, and architects examining all possible areas within the apartments, a suspect was never located during the investigation. On that note, there were also no reported findings that would suggest an intruder was occupying an area within the complex. In other words, no evidence of a makeshift bed, clothing, food, or other belongings that could have constituted their hideout. Among various potential places, possible hideout areas could have included the cellar, attic, utility closets, or other crawl spaces within the internal structure of the complex. But ultimately, all were reportedly found empty. With a human culprit being out of the equation, many supernatural and paranormal theories quickly came to fruition following the investigation. One initial otherworldly theory was the possibility of a poltergeist, one who had become attached to the Palazons family over the course of its activity. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, the word poltergeist derives from German, with polter meaning noise or racket, and geist meaning spirit. Collectively, poltergeists are known to transcend regular ghostly activity due to their very aggressive behavior. These actions typically include strange noises, such as loud banging or knocking sounds, rapid movements, slamming doors, turning lights on and off, the movement or even destruction of objects throughout the house, and in some rare cases, the starting of fires. Mysteriously, however, the existence of poltergeists has been the topic of much investigation, garnering the attention of paranormal researchers, religious experts, scientists, and parapsychologists. Most sources conclude that poltergeists are not like ghosts and that they do not derive from human spirits. Alternatively, it is theorized that poltergeists emerge from a buildup of negative energy that could be linked to a particular event or person. As a result, the energy manifests into a supernatural force with no discernible form. Collectively, poltergeists hold more differences than typical ghosts, however. While ghosts are known to haunt a specific location, poltergeists have been known to attach themselves to a particular individual or object in most cases. As a result, their investigation also proves more challenging than that of a ghost. Unlike ghosts, poltergeists also are not known to manifest, and remain completely invisible to the human eye. Even the slightest of ghostly apparitions, such as shadow figures, bright silhouettes, or orbs, are not the case for poltergeists. In relation to the Zaragoza apartment case, several factors do align with the behavior of a poltergeist. The source of the voice that haunted the Palazons was unseen and never manifested throughout the apartment. The poltergeist also maintained its fixation on both an object and an individual in the house, with its activities centered around the family stove, and the family's maid, Pascuala Alcocer. Most evident, of course, is the intense level of audible and aggressive disturbance from the voice itself, which lasted over the course of months. Additionally, multiple sources claim that poltergeists do have a tendency to gravitate towards children. This may explain the voice's direct communication with Arturo Grijalba, who was a young boy at the time of the investigation. The extent of Arturo's interaction with the poltergeist, however, was not fully explored during his interview with 𝗪𝗏𝗡𝗚 𝗪𝗏𝗏. Despite these consistencies, there are some very large disparities in the Zaragoza apartment case that do not align with typical poltergeist behavior. One glaring difference was the ability for the voice to clearly communicate, much like a living person. The voice was able to laugh, cry, yell, and hold conversation, possessing an unsettling knowledge of individuals' names, as well as detailed information regarding the building and the current investigation. This activity is not typical to common poltergeist activity. Additionally, the voice's disturbance was limited to audible aggression, and was not able to manipulate any of the objects, doors, or lights throughout the complex. In terms of the voice's attachment to Pascuala and the stove, its connection is also up for debate. Upon leaving Zaragoza, Pascuala did not report being haunted by the voice, nor did she experience any additional paranormal activity throughout her life. As for the stove, there were also no reports that the Palazons discarded the appliance following the close of the investigation. While poltergeist activity has been known to fluctuate over time, with periods of rest and periods of disturbance, the voice simply did not return, even with the stove still allegedly installed within the apartment complex. Regardless of what supernatural form the voice took, multiple sources state that priests were also brought into the Zaragoza apartments. Many residents and experts immersed in the case claim the voice to be diabolical in nature, believing it to be a dark or evil spirit. This sentiment sought the inclusion of the church in the investigation. According to reports, the priests performed prayers within the complex, while also sprinkling holy water throughout. While well-intentioned, it is unclear as to what impact the church's efforts had on the eventual disappearance of the voice itself. Apart from the voice being a potential poltergeist, a more popular theory has been tied to the events in Zaragoza. Many theorize that the voice belonged to a duende, a mischievous creature that is widely believed to exist in several countries. In fact, the belief in duendes is transcontinental, with stories and reported sightings across Central America, South America, the Caribbean, Spain, Portugal, and even the Philippines. In terms of appearance, the duende is similar to a small elf or dwarf-like creature, also associated with pixies and fairies from Western folklore. In terms of stature, their height ranges roughly from about 2 to 3 feet, which many purport to be even shorter. However, like its counterparts throughout the world, the duende have been known to be tricksters, being able to verbally communicate with humans. In Latin folklore, a wide variety of duendes also exist. Among the different kinds of duende, for example, include the 𝗪𝗛𝗓𝗛, a nymph-like variation with similarities to counterparts in ancient Greek mythology. These beings are similar in size to that of a fairy, and are said to dwell near rivers, ponds, and other bodies of water. Generally, the 𝗪𝗛𝗓𝗛s are benevolent beings that are known to offer blessings to forests, farms, and even livestock. Alternatively, a more frightening variation of duende, known as the diaño, are said to shapeshift into various living creatures. Reportedly, they can take the form of domestic animals, and in some instances even human babies. In these forms, the diaños have been known to chase humans during the night, often taking the form of dogs, donkeys, or even toads. Additionally, posing as a cold or wounded animal has also allowed diaños to stealthily enter the homes of their victims, allowing for further mischief to ensue. Among many types of duende, however, there is one that holds a strong connection to the investigation of the Zaragoza apartments, the 𝗪𝗏𝗏𝗏s, a variation of duende that are found in the northern Iberian Peninsula. Geographically, this does align with the apartment's location in the Spanish city of Zaragoza, also situated in the northern region of the peninsula. By nature, some regard 𝗪𝗏𝗏𝗏s to be among the most infuriating duende to deal with. Commonly translated to the word goblin, 𝗪𝗏𝗏𝗏s have been said to sneak inside homes through their chimneys, selecting a hidden space within the home to settle. This detail by itself is a very uncanny correlation to the Zaragoza apartment investigation. The voice's place of origin was the Palazons stove, perhaps in some inaccessible compartment. Conveniently, the stove was also connected to the building's chimney, which was how the voice managed to be heard as it echoed throughout the complex. Most eerily, however, was the fact that the voice knew the exact diameter of the chimney's opening, a piece of evidence that remains difficult to rationalize. Further consistencies link the 𝗧𝗛𝗡𝗚 with being the possible culprit behind the voice. Some sources state that 𝗧𝗛𝗡s can stealthily assist with keeping a home well kept, often assisting with other household chores as well. However, if the 𝗧𝗛𝗡𝗚 is mistreated, the 𝗧𝗛𝗡 can proceed to revolt against the family. This results in varying levels of mischief, including the creation of frightening noises at night, along with terrifying screams to scare domestic animals and/or residents within the household. This lore does align closely to the mysterious voice that plagued Pascuala, the Palazons, and the neighbors living within the complex. However, if a 𝗧𝗛𝗡 was truly responsible, it is unknown as to why the 𝗧𝗛𝗡 tormented the complex, how long it had been dwelling within it, and why its activity suddenly ceased months after its first incident. The belief of a duende existing within the Zaragoza apartment complex became so popular that the story quickly spread throughout the Spanish nation. In fact, the story proceeded to travel past national borders, making landfall in London, England. The investigation of an alleged goblin in a Spanish apartment complex became a major headline in The Times on November 27, 1934. Almost 90 years later, the case of the unidentified voice in Zaragoza's apartments remains a mystery, one that still has a lasting impact on the street of 𝗧𝗛𝗡𝗚𝗡𝗚. While the original building no longer exists, a new apartment complex was eventually constructed on the same corner. Fortunately, the voice never made a return. However, paying homage to its infamous roots, the complex received an interesting choice of name, Edificio Duende, or Duende Building. Today, no known individuals are alive to recount the tales of what transpired in 1934. The voice, despite many interesting theories, remains without a true culprit: a human intruder, a poltergeist, or a duende. These possibilities will continue to haunt the residents of Zaragoza, Spain, for many years to come. Alright guys, and that is a wrap on the 1934 Goblin mystery of Zaragoza, Spain. As always, I hope you guys enjoy learning about the lore and seeing the full build come to life. Now, unfortunately, as per usual, I had a very limited amount of photographs to work with, so I do believe I got the exterior of the apartment complex fairly close to the original. However, the inside is very much my own creation. Therefore, it is not 100% historically accurate. With that being said, this is still a no CC, no mod limited pack build, and will be available on the Sims 4 gallery for download. I'll leave you guys now with the final cinematic shots, along with the final lot specs as well. And, just like always, this has been 𝗧𝗛𝗡𝗏𝗧𝗛𝗡 signing off. Thank you so much for watching, guys.